Imagine walking through a cave, torch flickering, when you stumble across a human skull, placed upside down, surrounded by bones arranged like a shrine. There's no grave, no marker, just eerie silence. You think it's a burial, but it's not. It's something much stranger. What if the way we handle death today is nothing like how our ancestors did it for thousands of years? From sky burials to cannibalistic rituals, prehistoric humans treated their dead in ways that challenge everything we think we know about respect, grief, and survival. Are you ready to uncover the forgotten funeral secrets of the Stone Age? Chapter 1. The Myth of the Caveman Burial. Close your eyes and picture a caveman's funeral. Maybe you imagine a solemn group gathered around a fresh grave, placing stones, maybe flowers, saying some kind of farewell to the dead. It's neat, peaceful, respectful. It's also mostly wrong, because for tens of thousands of years, early humans didn't bury their dead the way we do. In fact, many didn't bury them at all. Let's travel back 50,000 years to a damp cave in Europe. The floor is littered with bones. Human bones. Scattered. Disconnected. Some cracked open. To an outsider, it looks like a crime scene. To the prehistoric tribe who lived there, it was just life. See, the whole idea that early humans treated death with quiet reverence is a modern fantasy. What we found, through digs, scans, and years of research, paints a picture that's far more chaotic and, honestly, way more disturbing. Most prehistoric people practiced exposure death. They didn't bury bodies, they left them out. In caves, on cliffs, in trees. Some were intentionally left in open air, where wild animals or the environment would take over the cleanup. And when they did touch the bodies afterward, it was often to remove specific parts. Skulls, teeth, limbs. Sometimes polished, sometimes painted, sometimes taken as trophies or tokens. Take the Goff's Cave site in England. Archaeologists found skulls that had been carefully cleaned, reshaped, and turned into bowls. Let that sink in. Imagine sipping liquid from a loved one's skull, or worse, from an enemy's. These weren't isolated incidents either. Across Europe and Asia, similar signs appear. Bones with tool marks, skeletons left half intact, burial pits that look more like ritual sites than graves. This isn't the respectful goodbye we've grown up with. For early humans, death wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something much stranger. So, if early humans didn't bury their dead like we do, when did burials actually begin? Surprisingly late. For most of human history, there was no such thing as a graveyard. In fact, the idea of carefully digging a hole and placing a body inside, with ceremony or grave goods, didn't become common until around 100,000 years ago, and even then, only in a few places. Take Neanderthals, for example. They lived across Europe and parts of Asia. For a long time, scientists thought they buried their dead in shallow pits, even placing flowers or tools beside them. It sounded sweet, emotional, even human. But over the past 2 decades, that theory started to fall apart. New evidence suggests many so-called burials were natural sinkholes or animal dens. In several cases, Neanderthal remains were scattered, disturbed by scavengers, not solemn mourners. Some skeletons show signs of intentional defleshing, meaning someone stripped the skin and muscles before leaving the bones behind. So what were they doing? Some researchers believe early humans didn't view dead bodies as sacred or untouchable. They were resources, something to be reused, protected, or even feared. And then there's the climate factor. Bodies decay differently in cold Ice Age Europe than they do in humid environments. In some cases, the dead froze before they could rot. Others mummified naturally, preserved by dry winds, salt, or ice. This left prehistoric people with visibly intact corpses months or even years later. Imagine walking into a cave and seeing your dead relative, still looking lifelike. What would you do? Would you bury them? Burn them? Or would you keep them around? Turns out, some ancient groups did just that. They lived alongside the dead. Literally, bones stored in homes, skulls tucked into sleeping spaces. It wasn't creepy to them, it was connection. But what happened when death became more than just loss, when it became sacred? That's what we explore in part 3. At some point in our evolution, something changed. Death stopped being just a disappearance and became a mystery, something to fear, something to understand. something sacred. The first signs of this shift show up in the form of symbolic burials. Picture this: a skeleton laid carefully on its side, almost as if asleep. The bones are dusted in red ochre, an iron-rich pigment, possibly meant to symbolize blood, life, or rebirth. This isn't an accident. It's a message, a ritual. One of the oldest examples comes from the site of Kafsa in modern-day Israel. A 100,000-year-old grave held a young child buried with antlers placed near its hands. Not food, not weapons, just meaning. We may never know what that meaning was, but clearly, someone cared enough to leave more than just a body behind. Then, there's the Sunger site in Russia. 2 children were buried head-to-head, surrounded by thousands of ivory beads and spears carved from mammoth tusk. These weren't average graves. They were statements of status, of memory, of belief. What sparked this new reverence? Maybe it was the rise of language, the ability to tell stories about the dead. Maybe it was the emergence of spiritual thought, wondering where someone went after their last breath. Or maybe death got personal. As communities grew, bonds deepened. People began to grieve, not just dispose. And grief demands ritual. But here's the twist. Even as some groups began burying their dead with care, others doubled down on more disturbing customs. Some still left the dead exposed. Some still removed skulls, painted them, or turned bones into tools. Death, it seems, meant different things to different tribes. For some, it was sacred. For others, strategic. And in the next chapter, we dive into the most chilling side of this story. What happens when the dead weren't just honored, but eaten? Let's start with something uncomfortable. Archaeologists are trained to spot patterns in bone. But when they found human bones with the same cut marks they usually saw on butchered animals, something clicked, and then turned their stomachs. These weren't the marks of ritual burial. They were signs of butchery, clean, intentional slices made by stone tools, right at the joints. Exactly where you'd cut to remove meat. So here's the disturbing truth. Some prehistoric humans weren't just living with their dead. They were eating them. Take the site at Goff's Cave in England. Dating back about 15,000 years, it's a place of undeniable cannibalism. Human bones were found with bite marks, crushed skulls, and marrowless leg bones, just like you'd expect from a butchered deer. But it gets stranger. The people there didn't just consume bodies for food. They crafted cups from skulls. Yes, actual human skull bowls, with edges carefully smoothed for holding liquids. Ritual or practicality? No one knows for sure. Then there's the case of El Sidrón Cave in Spain. 12 Neanderthals, men, women, and children, all butchered and likely eaten by others of their kind. Their bones were scattered, cracked, and cleaned of every edible part. What drives people to do that? It's easy to say survival. Maybe they were starving. Maybe winter came early. Maybe the hunt failed. But the details suggest something more complex. These weren't rushed, desperate bites in a snowstorm. They were systematic, methodical, almost practiced. And that opens up a whole new theory. What if it wasn't about hunger at all? What if it was about power, fear, or even belief? In Part 2, we explore the chilling possibility that prehistoric cannibalism wasn't a last resort. It was a ritual. Let's go deeper. Because while survival cannibalism explains some cases, many of the most disturbing discoveries suggest intentional, ritualistic behavior, not just desperation. Take the ancient site of Herxheim in Germany. Over 1,000 shattered human bones were found there, from men, women, even babies. They'd been carefully stripped of flesh, skulls broken open, and arranged in circular pits. Some bones were even charred, as if cooked. But here's the twist. There was no sign of famine. These people weren't starving. They were celebrating something. Some experts now believe the bodies were brought from far-off villages, not killed in battle, but offered, as if the flesh itself held spiritual value. Could this have been a ritual? A sacrifice? An early form of ancestor worship or enemy domination? Across the world, ancient cultures viewed the body, even in death, as powerful. Eating someone wasn't always shameful. It could be sacred. In some tribal traditions that persisted into modern times, consuming a relative's flesh was a way of keeping them close, merging spirit and blood. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about continuity. But not all cannibalism was so poetic. There's evidence that some groups used it to humiliate their enemies. to consume their strength, or, quite simply, to terrify survivors. Imagine watching your tribe's warrior fall in battle, and then seeing his bones boiled and eaten in front of you. That's not just food. That's psychological warfare. So which was it? Did cavemen eat their dead to survive the harsh world, to honor the ones they loved, or to crush the spirits of those they hated? The answer might be all three. But the most fascinating clues come from how they treated the skull. Because in part 3, we reveal how the human head, long before crowns and helmets, became a sacred object of fear, reverence, and ritual. If the body was meat, the skull was something else entirely. Unlike ribs or leg bones, skulls weren't just discarded after the flesh was gone. They were cleaned, modified, and often displayed, like relics. And the question is, why? Let's go back to Gough's Cave in England. Yes, we've talked about the human skull cups, but here's the creepy detail. The people who made them went to great lengths to preserve the facial curve, smoothing out the jagged edges with surgical precision. This wasn't a crude job. It was art. It took time, tools, and intention. Then there's the site of Keonu in modern-day Turkey, dating back 10,000 years. Archaeologists uncovered skulls buried beneath floors, often coated in red ochre or plastered to preserve facial features. In some homes, multiple skulls were stacked together, like shrines. And in Jericho, one of the oldest known cities, people embedded skulls with shell eyes and clay to recreate the face, then displayed them. These weren't just bones. They were memory devices, spiritual anchors, maybe even protection charms. It seems the head, the seat of the face, the brain, the voice, held enormous symbolic power. A kind of prehistoric soul container. In many cultures, the skull came to represent identity, ancestry, or dominion. Some were honored. Others were hunted. Because in warfare, the skull was also a trophy. To take someone's head and keep it meant something. You'd not only ended their life, you'd owned it. We see this echoed in tribal rituals, medieval warfare, even modern gang violence. But for cavemen, the practice may have started as something spiritual, not just brutal. To them, the dead were never truly gone. Their presence lingered in bone and blood, and especially in the skull. So whether eaten, buried, or displayed, prehistoric people didn't just fear death. They tried to hold on to it. And in the next chapter, we'll witness the first flickers of something we recognize today, the beginning of grief. There's a moment in human history that changed everything. A moment when the dead weren't just dealt with. They were remembered. And the first clue we have of that emotional shift isn't a tool, isn't a skull cup. It's a body, laid gently in the earth, covered in red powder, as if symbolically bled back into the soil. This was more than disposal. It was meaning. The site is Cavemen Cave, Israel. Roughly 100,000 years ago, a young woman and a child were buried side by side. The bones were stained with red ochre, and nearby lay a collection of tools that the dead couldn't possibly use. So why bury them? Because someone cared. This is the first known sign that death stirred something deeper, not just fear, but sorrow, ritual, maybe even hope. You see, grief is complicated. It's not just pain, it's storytelling. It's keeping someone alive in your mind after they're gone. And for that to exist, you need more than memory. You need symbolism. That's where burial comes in. To us, it seems obvious. But to early humans, putting a body into the ground and marking it was a profound leap in thinking. It required belief in something else. Another world. An afterlife. A spirit that needed peace or protection. This is where we start to see the beginning of culture, not just survival. Because survival doesn't need ceremony. You don't need to sing, to paint, or to bury. But meaning does. And as we move forward in time, the burials grow more elaborate, more expressive, even more mysterious. In part 2, we'll explore how prehistoric people began honoring the dead with objects, symbols, and gestures, and why these ancient funeral gifts still haunt archaeologists today. As we dig deeper into prehistoric graves, one thing becomes clear. The dead were often buried with more than just their bodies. They were surrounded by objects, tools, jewelry, animal bones, even pieces of red ochre, things that seemed to serve no practical purpose for the dead themselves. Why? These grave goods suggest early humans believed in an afterlife or some form of continued existence beyond death. At sites like Sungur in Russia, we find burials loaded with thousands of ivory beads and finely crafted spears placed carefully around the bodies. These weren't mere decorations. They were gifts meant to accompany the dead on their journey, or perhaps symbols of status, identity, or protection. Imagine the emotional weight behind such acts. To spend time and effort arranging these objects meant the dead mattered deeply. It showed reverence. It showed love. At the same time, these ritual practices might have helped the living cope with grief. By creating stories and symbols around death, prehistoric humans found ways to connect with the departed and face the terrifying unknown. But it's not always clear whether these gestures were hopeful or fearful. Did they believe their loved ones would find peace? Or were these acts meant to ward off evil spirits, prevent hauntings, or stop the dead from returning? Sometimes, these grave goods even included animal parts, claws, teeth, or skulls, possibly serving as spiritual guides or guardians. Such practices hint at the earliest forms of shamanism or spiritual beliefs rooted deeply in respect for life and death. Yet, these rituals were far from universal. Some groups ignored grave goods entirely. Others continued exposing bodies or engaging in cannibalistic rites. Grief and belief evolved unevenly, reflecting diverse cultures and survival strategies. In Part 3, we'll explore some of the most mysterious and haunting prehistoric burials ever discovered, bodies buried with strange objects, painted bones, and possible signs of ancient mourning that still puzzle scientists today. Some prehistoric burials don't just tell stories, they scream mysteries. Take the famous Dolní Věstonice site in the Czech Republic, dating back about 26,000 years. Here, archaeologists found a triple burial of a man, a woman, and an infant, surrounded by thousands of broken mammoth bones and red ochre sprinkled like blood. But it's not just the grave goods or the red dust. What's haunting is the positioning of the bodies, intertwined, almost as if they were holding each other for comfort. Could this be a family lost to tragedy? Or something more ritualistic? Then there's the Ain Ghazal site in Jordan, with plastered skulls modeled with shells for eyes, possibly representing ancestors, but no bodies attached. Were these faces meant to preserve memory, or to protect the living from restless spirits? In some Ice Age caves, naturally mummified bodies have been found with twisted limbs and odd markings, signs that suggest ancient mourning or even violent death. One of the strangest cases is the Neanderthal child burial at La Chapelle aux Saints in France. This skeleton showed signs of care and healing before death, suggesting a community that looked after its weakest members, a glimpse of empathy millions of years ago. All these discoveries point to one thing. Prehistoric humans were beginning to wrestle with loss, love, and legacy. They weren't just surviving, they were feeling. But grief took many forms. Some burials show signs of care and respect. Others hint at fear, confusion, or even anger. Could death have sparked the earliest human religion? Did these rituals plant the seeds for our modern beliefs about the soul, afterlife, and remembrance? We don't have all the answers. But one thing is clear. These ancient burials connect us across time, reminding us that the need to mourn, remember, and honor the dead is as old as humanity itself. Next up, we'll explore the eerie world where the dead weren't buried or eaten, but kept close, sometimes too close. Imagine stumbling upon a human body frozen solid for thousands of years, intact, untouched, almost lifelike. That's exactly what happened when archaeologists uncovered Ice Age remains in caves scattered across Europe and Siberia. These aren't just ordinary skeletons. They are natural time capsules, preserved by cold, dry air or ice, offering an eerie glimpse into the past. Take the famous Ice Maiden of the Altai Mountains. Her body was found with skin, hair, and even clothing perfectly preserved, as if she had just fallen asleep. This level of preservation is incredibly rare and provides clues not only about how prehistoric people lived, but how they died and were treated afterward. Frozen bodies show us something extraordinary. Prehistoric people sometimes left their dead exposed, trusting nature to take its course. Unlike burial, this meant the corpse remained visible, a haunting presence in the environment. But why? Was it practical? Were they avoiding the effort of digging? Or did it have deeper spiritual meaning, leaving the dead to return to the earth or sky naturally? In some cases, these frozen bodies show evidence of injuries or violent deaths, hinting at brutal realities. The dead weren't always honored. They were sometimes victims of conflict or harsh survival struggles. These well-preserved skeletons challenge our understanding of prehistoric death rituals. They reveal a world where death was immediate and raw, not always softened by ritual or remembrance. In Part 2, we'll explore even stranger finds, skulls hidden under floors, buried in secret places, or carefully preserved in ways that suggest fear and reverence coexisted. Some ancient people didn't just bury their dead, they hid them. Underneath the floors of early homes, archaeologists have uncovered skulls carefully placed, sometimes painted or coated with red ochre. Why keep skulls inside your living space? Protection? Reverence? Fear? At the Neolithic site of Çatalhöyük in modern Turkey, dozens of plastered skulls were found tucked beneath house floors, their faces recreated with clay and shells. These were likely ancestors, honored and preserved to watch over the living. This practice wasn't isolated. Across the ancient world, from Jericho to Europe, similar discoveries show skulls treated like sacred relics, carefully hidden yet prominently displayed. In some cases, skulls were separated from the bodies and kept for years, suggesting a belief that the spirit lingered in the skull itself. But there's also a darker side. Some skulls show signs of violent removal. Cut marks and broken bones hint at conflict, or even ritualistic killings. Were these enemies? Sacrificial victims? Or ancestors whose spirits needed containment? The answers remain unclear, but these hidden heads speak of a complex relationship with death, one that blends respect, fear, and power. Keeping the dead so close blurs the lines between life and death, past and present. In Part 3, we'll dive into the frozen and mysterious children's burials, tiny bodies preserved for millennia that reveal a haunting glimpse of prehistoric loss and care. Among the most haunting prehistoric discoveries are the frozen children, tiny bodies preserved for tens of thousands of years in icy caves and permafrost. One striking example comes from Siberia's Denisova cave, where the bones of a young girl, now known as the X-woman, were found alongside stone tools and animal remains. Though she lived over 50,000 years ago, her remains offer an intimate glimpse into early human life and death. These frozen children tell stories of care and tragedy. Evidence shows some survived injuries or illnesses thanks to community support, a glimpse of prehistoric compassion. But many died young, sometimes violently, and were left in cold, dark places, perhaps intentionally. In some cases, the icy conditions naturally mummified the bodies, preserving even skin and hair. This allows modern scientists to study their DNA, diet, and even illnesses. But why were children buried or left in these remote, harsh environments? Were they part of ritual sacrifices? Were they kept separate from adults due to spiritual beliefs? Or was it simply practical? Caves preserved bodies better than shallow graves. Some theories suggest these sites were sacred places, thresholds between life and death. The presence of flowers, tools, or pigments near these children hints at early ritual mourning. The frozen silence of these ancient children speaks louder than words, reminding us that even in the harshest times, human beings have always felt love, loss, and hope. Their preserved bones bridge a gap across millennia, telling us that grief and remembrance are deeply woven into our species' story. Next, we'll explore a world where the dead weren't buried or left, but kept close, sometimes worn, displayed, or even feared. Imagine living your daily life with the skull of a dead relative staring back at you from the corner of your home. For many prehistoric groups, this wasn't unusual, it was normal. Across ancient settlements, archaeologists have uncovered evidence that humans kept bones and skulls inside their homes, sometimes displayed prominently or even worn as jewelry. Why? Because these remains were more than just bones. They were believed to hold power, protection, or the very spirit of the deceased. At the Neolithic site of Skara Brae in Scotland, for example, animal bones and human skull fragments were found in houses, possibly as talismans to guard the living. Similarly, In early farming villages across the Near East, skulls were often plastered and painted before being set on shelves or beneath floors, as a way to honor ancestors and keep their presence alive. These were not just tokens of memory, they were active participants in everyday life. Some researchers believe that by keeping these remains close, prehistoric people maintained a connection with their ancestors, seeking guidance, blessings, or protection from the spirit world. But this closeness also blurred the lines between the living and the dead. Did having skulls in the home comfort people or haunt them? Did it foster respect or fear? And what about wearing bones as jewelry? In many cultures, human teeth, bones, or skull fragments were fashioned into necklaces or amulets. These items could signify status, bravery, or even act as spiritual shields. In Part 2, we'll uncover chilling stories of how some skulls were displayed as trophies, symbols of power, or warnings, and what that says about prehistoric society. The human skull has long been a symbol of power, and prehistoric people knew it. In many ancient cultures, taking and displaying an enemy's skull wasn't just about violence. It was a statement. At sites like Unearthed in Kenya, archaeologists uncovered evidence of brutal conflict, skulls smashed, bodies left in pools of blood. Some skulls showed signs of deliberate removal after death, suggesting they were taken as trophies. Why? Because owning a skull was owning the person's power, even after death. It sent a clear message: we defeated you. We control you. These skulls might have been displayed publicly to intimidate rivals or protect the living from evil spirits believed to linger in the dead. But this practice wasn't limited to enemies. In some cases, skulls of ancestors were carefully preserved and displayed to reinforce lineage and identity. In parts of ancient Europe, skulls were plastered and painted, sometimes with red ochre or decorated with shells, transforming them into powerful spiritual objects. This dual role of skulls, as trophies and sacred relics, shows a complex relationship with death. Prehistoric people saw death as both an end and a beginning, a source of fear, respect, and sometimes dominance. This blurred boundary affected social structure, rituals, and how communities viewed themselves. Owning the skulls of foes or honoring ancestors reinforced status and connection to the spirit world. But it also shows that prehistoric life was violent, unpredictable, and filled with symbolism we are only beginning to understand. In the final part, we'll explore how these practices shaped human identity and how, even today, echoes of these ancient rituals survive in modern cultures. The ancient practice of keeping the dead close hasn't disappeared. It echoes in many modern traditions. From ancestor worship in parts of Asia to the Mexican Day of the Dead, humans continue to honor and remember those who came before. These rituals remind us that the boundary between life and death is often fluid, shaped by culture, belief, and emotion. In prehistoric times, this connection was physical: skulls in homes, bones worn as jewelry. Today, it's memory, photos, and stories. But the deep need to keep the dead near, whether through objects or rituals, shows something timeless. It reveals our desire for continuity, to feel rooted in something larger than ourselves, to wrestle with grief, loss, and the unknown. By studying ancient death rituals, we learn not only about prehistoric survival, but about the very core of human nature. The dead weren't just forgotten, they were part of the living world. They influenced behavior, shaped communities, and sparked beliefs that would evolve into religion, art, and culture. And in the end, understanding how cavemen treated their dead helps us see our own humanity more clearly. Because despite the strange, unsettling, or shocking customs, the story of death is also a story of love, memory, and connection. Thank you for joining this journey through time. If you found this fascinating, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. What ancient death ritual shocked you the most? Let me know in the comments below. Grief is one of the most powerful emotions humans feel, but when did it first emerge? Was it something only modern humans experience? Or did our prehistoric ancestors feel the deep ache of losing a loved one too? Archaeological evidence suggests that the roots of grief stretch back tens of thousands of years. At sites like Shanidar Cave in Iraq, we find the remains of Neanderthals who lived long, difficult lives, some showing signs of serious injuries or illness that would have required care from others. One individual, nicknamed the flower burial, was found covered in pollen from wildflowers. Did this represent a ritual, a mourning practice, or simply a natural occurrence? Whatever the case, it hints at a prehistoric recognition of death's emotional impact. More than just survival, these early humans may have developed complex social bonds that made death a profound loss. They may have comforted each other, shared memories, and even developed rituals to honor the dead. This shift marks a turning point in human evolution, from simply managing death to mourning it. But grief wasn't just about emotion. It also changed how people interacted with their environment and each other. In Part 2, we'll explore how early mourning shaped social behavior and led to the development of early rituals, art, and storytelling. As grief took hold, early humans began to express it through rituals, acts that helped them cope with loss and keep memories alive. Around 40,000 years ago, we start to see evidence of grave goods, tools, shells, and pigments placed with the dead, symbolizing care and remembrance. These rituals weren't just about disposal, they were about connection. They gave meaning to death, suggesting belief in an afterlife or spiritual world. But beyond objects, mourning sparked storytelling. Stories about the dead, who they were, what they meant, became vital to passing on culture and identity. The use of red ochre, often called blood of life, hints at symbolic thinking, a way to mark death as part of a cycle, not an end. Art also emerged alongside these rituals. Cave paintings and carvings may have been ways to honor the dead or express grief. In some cases, animals in art could represent totems or guides for the deceased. These early stories and rituals helped bind communities together, giving strength in the face of loss. They shaped human culture's foundation, the need to remember and honor those gone. But mourning was not uniform everywhere. Some groups continued earlier customs, exposure, cannibalism, or hiding bones, showing a patchwork of beliefs and practices. In Part 3, we'll look at how this complex relationship with death evolved into the religions and funeral rites that define human history. The rituals of mourning and remembrance laid the groundwork for something much bigger, religion. As prehistoric humans grappled with death, they began to develop beliefs about the afterlife, spirits, and divine powers. Burials became more elaborate, with carefully placed grave goods, symbolic pigments, and sometimes even constructed tombs. At sites like Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey, monumental stone structures suggest organized spiritual activity, possibly connected to beliefs about death and rebirth. Religious thought gave death meaning beyond the physical. It offered hope of reunion, transformation, or eternal life. This shift changed how communities related to each other and to the dead. It created social cohesion through shared rituals, stories, and taboos. The dead were no longer just passed through or feared. They became part of a larger cosmic order. But even as religion grew, older practices didn't vanish overnight. Exposure, cannibalism, and ancestor veneration persisted in various forms, showing a complex, layered history. Understanding this evolution helps us see how deeply entwined death and belief are in human nature. The way cavemen treated their dead was not just about survival or fear. It was the birth of culture, identity, and faith. And it's a story that still echoes today, in the funerals we hold, the memories we cherish, and the mysteries we ponder. Thank you for joining this journey through time and death. If you found this story compelling, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. What ancient death ritual surprised you the most? From the earliest bones covered in red ochre to the haunting skull cups and frozen children, the story of how cavemen treated their dead reveals something deeply human. Death wasn't just an end, it was a beginning, a gateway to ritual, grief, and connection. It shows us that long before cities and religions, humans struggled with loss, memory, and meaning, just like we do today. Their strange, shocking customs may seem alien, but at their core, they reflect our shared need to hold on to those we love, to find hope amid fear, and to keep stories alive across generations. So next time you think about the past, remember, our ancestors were not so different. They taught us that death can be powerful, that mourning can be creative, and that even in darkness, The human spirit reaches for light. Thank you for coming on this journey through time. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. What ancient ritual surprised you the most? Let's keep the conversation going.